Today I did my weekly cardio routine of doing 500 kilocalories on the assault bike. In my gym there is an Assault Bike Pro X, this one, which has handles compared to a bike which does not have handles. This allows to also train the upper body. By pressing the split button, which is here split time, I then take the times and then I take a picture at 100 kilocalories, then at 250 and finally at 500. What I also discovered is that I can have the max values displayed. So it seems that I peaked 1.3k watts, also kilowatts, which is a little bit less than 2 PS. And then I can also see my average, which was 200 watts. 209 watts to be exact. I wanted a standardized workout that I then could compare over time. So now I can see all the entries I have for the 500 kilocalories over the last now 2 years. So I began on November the 3rd in 2023, and there I had significantly better times. So my first ever time was 41 minutes and 48 seconds. I then eventually hit my record time of 41 minutes and 1 second on February 15th in 24. Now luckily within app Guava Health, in which I track this, I then can select this factor and I can select the value, not the occurrence, and then I click on done, and then I select a second metric like resting heart rate. So what would you say would the correlation ideally be? So should the resting heart rate go up? Should it go down? What, and also in which time frame? So should it go up on the same day? Should it maybe go up still in the same week? And this correlation also shows, I think, why something like Garmin's endurance score is so valuable. One could now argue, if I do assault bike, then over the long course, so basically the lower my assault bike time for a given amount of calories, in this case my 500, the lower my resting heart rate should be, because the higher my cardiovascular ability. So let's take a look at resting heart rate that day. This should probably go up, as basically on that day, my body has to recover, for the resting heart rate is slightly higher. We can actually now see all of these data points on this data plot here. And what we also can see is the statistical significance that is in this case high, with a p-value of 0.005. App Guava Health automatically divides the data set of basically the first metric into two. It selects a threshold, that makes sense. And then we have below 3,310 seconds, and then we have a couple of days with above 3,310 seconds. But I, in total, only have 25 entries because I do this on a weekly basis. Sometimes I go swimming, sometimes I do something else, and sometimes the assault bike in the gym was broken in the last couple of years. Now, what we can see is that on the days on which I had a lower, so basically lower than 3,310 seconds, I had a resting heart rate of 50.2 beats per minute on that day. Now what's actually unclear to me is whether that day is the resting heart rate from the night before or from the night after. I assume kind of it's the day before, because that's also how Garmin usually displays it. So now, what would you expect the next day? So the next day, should it go up, should it go down? There is no correlation, no significant correlation. We can also then check on a weekly basis. So here, the question is also, what should it actually do? Because let's say I am putting in more effort in a certain week, then my average resting heart rate for that week is probably higher compared to average. Especially if I'm going all out on the assault bike, which I, at least recently, rarely ever am able to. So we can also see here that there is a slight correlation, so it goes down 10%. So I do have a weekly average lower resting heart rate on the days on which I basically have a tracked assault bike session with above 3,040 seconds. And since basically the calorie amount is given, the longer it takes me, the lower my resting heart rate basically. But what I actually want to see is my resting heart rate go down because my cardiovascular ability goes up. So we can switch to a monthly basis, that's kind of the maximum period, and there is no significant correlation with the 25 entries here. Now, of course, I have many more entries for resting heart rate because my resting heart rate is measured ideally every single night by my Garmin. But this now shows that basically I cannot really make out whether there is actually a difference. In the short term, it seems to make more sense to actually take a look at Garmin load. So Garmin load basically tells me how much input, cardiovascular input, I am giving. So basically how much output also. So there is also the load ratio, which is basically my acute load. So the last 7 days, the load of the last 7 days compared to the last 4 weeks. And basically my load ratio should be in between 0.8 and 1.5. And this is always the same, because the higher I go, the higher the load of the last 4 weeks also is. It's basically a rate of change, and this rate of change should be ideally between 0.8 and 1.5. But wouldn't it be nice if I would have a marker of cardiovascular ability? The answer is yes, it would be nice, and so Garmin has for one the VO2 max estimate, which I can also manipulate to a certain extent if I go running fasted but still with filled glycogen stores in the morning, let's say, compared to me having ingested just 2 kilograms of food and water and then trying to go onto a run, on which I'm obviously heavier, even though I'm measured in basically lower in the morning, because in the morning I'm obviously lighter. And so to me at least, it seems to be very useful that Garmin Endurance Score exists and that it basically takes into account VO2 max, but it also takes into account every time I do input cardiovascular exercise and I track it with my Garmin watch. It's a marker for my cardiovascular ability that's higher in sampling rate compared to the VO2 max, which only measures or updates every time I hit 70% of my heart rate max, also by Garmin determined in a run that I do, and that has to be for 10 minutes.